Hey, what's up? Justin here with 65 Drums. Welcome back to the channel. So today I'm doing my video about the Pearl Emerge. I've gotten a chance to play the prototype and I've seen photos and videos of it like you did, but now it's finally out and I got a chance to play the finished actual production version. So these are going to be my thoughts about the good and the bad and whether or not it's worth buying. So the interesting thing to me is that if Pearl just came out with this maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, they would have faced hardly any competition, around $4,000. Which is probably why they priced it at around this price range. But I think they really took their time on it and really tried to optimize it. That's good, made the drum set better, but also all of a sudden there's tons of new drum sets around this price range. There are two different variations of this kit. The first one is called the Pearl Emerge E Traditional, and the second one is called the Pearl Emerge E Hybrid. As far as I can tell, they have the exact same kick drum sensor, but one is standalone and one is just inside of an 18-inch kick drum behind a mesh drum head. The funny thing about the sensor, or at least the cushion in front of the sensor, is that it feels like a living room couch. That's kind of like the feel of that material. So I'm glad that Pearl is offering two different options here. Some people buy electronic drums specifically because they want portability, and this will give that to them. But of course, if I had to choose between these two, I would definitely go for the hybrid version because you get better stage presence and it's just more fun to play on drum sets that are closer to their acoustic counterparts, at least to me personally. So here are the sizes of the drums. The snare is 14 inches across. You get a 10 and 12 inch set of high toms, and the floor tom is 14 inches across. And of course, the kick drum can either be the 18-inch version, or you can get the kick drum pad. For cymbals, you get a 14-inch set of hi-hats, you get a 15-inch crash cymbal, and you get an 18-inch ride cymbal, which is going to be kind of like the standard around this price range now. Everyone has an 18-inch ride cymbal. I like all of that. The ride cymbal is 3 zones, it's chokeable, and the crash and the hi-hats are 2 zones. I had issues with the early prototype version of those cymbals. They just were not responding well, but now the finished version has come out and I did not experience any of those problems anymore. They're just like standard electronic cymbals. Nothing really to write home about, they just perform pretty well. I'm not a fan of that plastic wedge on top of it. I just feel like that was a really not smart move on their part, but hey, it's the design decision they went with and that's just the way it is. I like the drums more though. They actually bring something different and unique to the table. So the drums themselves are made with Poplar Shells and they're using a 6-ply drum head material pad on top of it. But the end result is something that feels very, very heavy. Mesh has the tendency to feel a little bit springy, and that's why some people just despise mesh. Most of us like mesh heads, but we understand that it's a little bit more bouncy, and that's why you have to go with like 3-ply or whatever, or tune it a certain way just to make it feel right. With these drum heads, they kind of feel like halfway between rubber and mesh to me. They're very, very heavy, dense mesh heads. And I'm not even really sure what all went into these drum heads. I don't know what kind of materials that they ended up using, but I really liked playing on them. I think they're going to be louder than standard mesh heads though, because of how much material and the density that's being used there. The snare itself is very interesting. First of all, it has 2 rim sensors, very much like the Yamaha DTX silicone pads. So you have a sensor just for rim shots, and then you have a different sensor just for rim click. You don't have to press a mode button or anything. They just have 2 sensors, so it just works out of the box, which I love. Also, this needs to have 2 cables to plug into the drum module. One thing that they really tout in their advertising is the Korg integration. So this drum set is very much a partnership with Korg and Pearl together. Korg is very well known for the Korg wave drum technology. They make a really, really nice percussion pad that acoustic drummers all over the place use. A lot of very famous guys love the Korg wave drum. And I really like it too. I think it's a solid pad. And somehow they blend like the sound, the acoustic sound of your playing with the samples that are inside of the pad itself. That is my understanding. All I noticed was that the samples, they were fine. We'll talk more about them in the module section of the video, but I didn't really notice any sort of like earth-shattering realization that this was now the best electronic snare I've ever played. Really, all you need to know about these pads is that they felt very dense, they didn't have a ton of rebound, they felt very fun to play on, and overall, they tracked your playing incredibly well. I also really liked the kick drum. It didn't feel overly bouncy like some mesh kick drums can tend to be, and I think most of the reason why it's not bouncy comes down to the sensor. It has a very large piece of dampening foam or material on the front of it, and it really absorbs a lot of the shock from each of your kick drum hits. So I liked it. It felt very good to play on. And then finally, one last thing I want to mention before we move ahead to the drum module section of the video is the drum rack. You know, I do prefer having individual stands, but because this drum set is trying to ride that line between portability and also acoustic sizes, they went with a drum rack instead of individual stands, which I'm fine with. The drum rack that they have is called the Pearl Icon Rack, and it's very solidly built and it looks nice. I think it's a good option. The only downside of buying into this whole Pearl eMerge system is the fact that from talking to the people at Pearl and from reading stuff online, I got the impression that this is a closed down walled garden of an ecosystem. If you want to add a cymbal, you gotta go buy one of those Pearl cymbals. Of course, you can sort of force different brands to work with different electronic drums sometimes, but really this thing is made to only work with Pearl components, which is kind of unfortunate because they have the Pearl Mimic, which is made to work with everything, and I wish that sort of mentality would bleed over to their actual drum set lines, but instead they took the opposite approach with this kit and made it just, walled off. It only works with Pearl gear. All right, so moving ahead to the drum module, this is the Pearl eMerge. The first thing that you need to know about this is that when you're using it, you quickly realize this isn't like a flagship drum module. It's more of like a mid-tier drum module. It does the job and it gives you certain things, different parameters to adjust and stuff, but it's not really like a DTX 900M, a TD50, or a 2-box module or anything like that. This is very much a mid-tier drum module. It reminds me of the TD25. So inside you get 35 drum kits and about 700 sounds. The samples are from Korg and also from Pearl. They sampled a bunch of Pearl drum sets and put them into the module, and they also took a bunch of sounds from Korg's library and then put them inside of this module as well. And thankfully, you too can take sounds that you find, different samples online, and put them into the drum module because it has a sample import feature. I was also really happy to see that they give you a full suite of effects to change your sound however you want to do it. Compression, tube saturation, reverb, stuff like that. And also some weird stuff like radio filtering, auto wah, and tons of other things. There's about 36 different effects to play with. One of my favorite features of the drum module is the Ambient Slider. So you can quickly dial in how dry the kit sounds or how alive and ringy and overall ambient the kit sounds. I have one of those on my TD30 drum module and I really, really like it. They made this module very, very simple and easy to use. Part of this is because it's not a flagship drum module. It isn't stuffed to the gills with a ton of different sounds and a ton of different editing features and stuff like that. If you move to the back of the module, you'll see that they're using a DB25 cable snake for all the different pad inputs, plus 3 additional standalone inputs on the back of the module. I love the fact that there are a ton of different direct outs. I like that, really helps when you're using this live. Okay, so moving ahead, let's talk about overall sound quality. This is always tricky to talk about in videos like this because no one can agree what good is and what bad is. I can take one snare sample and half of you will love it and half of you will hate it. Overall, I feel like these sounds are okay. They kind of toe the line of electronic drum sounds. They're not gonna blow your socks off, but they're not bad. They're decent, okay electronic sounds to me. I heard them live in like a concert showcase thing that they did in the Pearl booth just to try to show off the kit, and I thought it sounded pretty good. I'll show you a little clip, but remember this is just like through a Rode VideoMic Pro. I'm not getting a direct feed from the mixer itself. Watching YouTube videos, I thought the sounds were okay, but maybe slightly weak. Playing them in person, I thought the sounds were decent. They were fun to practice to and doodle around with, and just, recording the playing examples that I did for this video, I enjoyed them. And then listening to them through really big speakers for that performance, I thought they sounded great. I thought that they were punchy, they fit well with the music, and overall, I just enjoyed listening to those sounds. The one thing that kind of gave the drum set away as being electronic sounding were the cymbals. It wasn't drastic, but electronic cymbals can tend to sound a certain way, and you can just tell when you're listening to an electronic drum set through certain modules. So basically my view on it is that it's fine for practice, it's fine for some live use, but if you're gonna do any sort of serious recording for like a really well thought out drum cover, or for like recording a track for an EP or something, use drum software. Go buy Superior Drummer 3, go buy Steven Slate Drums 5, get good drums, addictive drums, whatever. Drum software will just sound better. Is it the best module at this price range? Probably not, but I think it's still pretty solid. But of course, now I have to bring up the elephant in the room. Pearl has another drum module that is very, very famous. It's like a rock star in the electronic drum sphere, and that's the Pearl Mimic Pro. Of course, it's probably too expensive to pair with this drum set because it costs about $2,000, but they could have just made a dumbed down version of that drum module. Instead of the Pearl Mimic Pro, they could have just made a Pearl Mimic and then put it with these pads. They could have done that, but they decided not to, which confused a lot of people because that module is like one of the best in the entire world. It has a very nice touchscreen. It works with all kinds of different pads from different companies. They spent a lot of time getting it right, a lot of R&D into it, a lot of updates. It's got stock sounds from a drum software, Steven Slate Drums 5, but they kind of just pretended it didn't exist and made a whole new separate drum module that isn't as good as the Pearl Mimic. I feel like it could have saved them a lot of money. They didn't have to go develop an all new drum module. They could have just taken away a few features and made a drum module that was a little bit cheaper, paired with mesh pads, and they would have had a great drum set. As far as I can tell, Pearl just decided that they wanted to keep the Pearl Mimic Pro as its own separate standalone thing that works with everything, and they wanted to make a more proprietary, just separate drum set over here. So they still both exist, but they're not really affiliated with each other in any way. I gotta be honest here, I feel like it was a missed opportunity, and if Pearl actually asked real electronic drummers what they wanted, they would have said, just take a few of the features away and make a cheaper version of the Pearl Mimic and use that as the powerhouse, the engine for this new Pearl Emerge drum set. But regardless, we can talk about all the armchair quarterback stuff, if that, and why didn't they do this or that. But in the end, I still think Pearl has a solid drum set here. So here are the general pros and cons of this drum set as I see them. I like the sizes. They strike that balance between portability while still making you feel at home if you primarily play acoustic and then only occasionally switch over to electronic. Also has a little bit of stage presence while not being too heavy. I like the feel of the pads, especially those 6-ply heads. The drum rack is also very solid, very well built. I think the sounds are decent, nothing really to write home about, but I still think that they're good. I like the fact that the module has that ambient slider, I like the direct outs, and there are a few other things that it just does right. As far as cons go, 6-ply drum heads will be a little bit louder than regular mesh heads, so just be aware of that. I wish they didn't go with the cable snake, but that's what they went with. They have this as a locked down ecosystem. You have to use Pearl pads with this drum module, unfortunately. They had the best drum module, the Pearl Mimic, and they just decided that they weren't gonna use it for this drum set. And that's really the biggest con of all, in my opinion. Of course, there are plenty of things that I wish Pearl had done a little bit different with this drum set, but I still had a great time playing it. I walked away very happy with the kit. I don't think that it wins the spec wars when you compare it to other kits around this price range, but for some reason, I just ended up really liking this drum set. It was very fun to play on. I'm very interested to see which kind of drum set drummers will go with, the Pearl option or the Roland option. And now we have EF Note also coming in around this price. And of course, you got ATV still in the fight around the $4,000 price range as well. I might have to do a separate video, best kit for $4,000. Let me know if you guys want to see that down in the comments below. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in a few.